For 10 long years, a loyal dog never left his owner's grave. What he did each day became a story the world would never forget. When a faithful German shepherd lost his best friend, he chose a graveyard vigil that lasted a decade, loyalty beyond imagination. This is the true story of a dog who slept beside his owner's grave for 10 years, showing a love so pure it moved entire communities. Through storms, seasons, and silence, one dog kept watch at his master's grave for a decade, an unbroken promise of eternal devotion. In a small town tucked away from the noise of big cities, where the air still smelled of pine trees after a summer rain and the church bells carried across open fields every Sunday morning, a story began that would live far longer than any headline or fleeting piece of news. It was not a story about power or wealth, nor about politics or fame, but about loyalty, love, and a dog who became a symbol of devotion in the purest form imaginable. The man at the heart of this story was Michael Turner, a hard-working carpenter in his mid-40s, who had built more than homes throughout his life. He had built trust, friendships, and a quiet reputation for honesty that people in town respected deeply. Michael was not the kind of man who sought the spotlight. He lived simply in a modest house at the edge of town, close to the rolling hills where the sunsets spilled gold over the horizon. His days were filled with sawdust, the hum of tools, and the satisfaction of shaping wood into something useful. But the truest source of joy in his life did not come from his craft. It came from a companion who had padded into his world one rainy evening, shaking off water on his porch like he had always belonged there. That companion was a German shepherd named Shadow. Shadow had not come from a breeder or a pet store. He was a stray that Michael had found wandering near the hardware store one night, ribs showing, fur matted, and eyes that spoke of both fear and hope. Michael knelt on the sidewalk, offered his sandwich, and the bond was sealed in that quiet exchange. From that night forward, Shadow never left his side. He was not just a dog, he was Michael's guardian, his confidant, his silent witness to every triumph and every hardship. Together, they built a rhythm. Shadow followed him to job sites, waiting patiently by the truck until lunch breaks when Michael would toss him scraps. They took long evening walks down by the river, where the dog would bound through shallow water, chasing sticks as Michael laughed, the sound echoing off the rocks. In winter, they sat by the fire, the warmth flickering against Shadow's coat as Michael read books aloud as though the dog understood every word. In many ways, Shadow was the family Michael had never had. For years, their lives were woven tightly together, a man and his dog against the changing seasons of life. Neighbors came to expect the sight of them, Michael with his tool belt slung over one shoulder, Shadow trotting a step behind. Children in the neighborhood adored him, and Shadow responded with gentle patience, allowing tiny hands to pat his head or tug lightly at his ears. He became a fixture in the community, known not just as Michael's dog, but as everyone's loyal friend. Yet, no matter how loved he was by others, his devotion was always directed toward one man. Where Michael went, Shadow followed. But fate, as it often does, disrupted this perfect companionship. One autumn afternoon, when the leaves had begun to carpet the sidewalks in shades of red and gold, Michael collapsed while working on a client's porch. The sound of his hammer falling drew the homeowner outside, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. A heart attack had struck without warning, and Michael was gone. In that moment, the town lost a beloved carpenter, and Shadow lost his entire world. The funeral was held a few days later at the local cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. The church was packed with neighbors, friends, and clients who came to pay respects to the man who had built their homes and their trust. Among them all, none was more inconsolable than Shadow. Dressed in black, pallbearers carried the casket down the aisle, but what people remember most vividly was the German shepherd, lying stubbornly at the entrance, refusing to move until someone gently coaxed him along. At the graveside, as the pastor spoke and tears fell, Shadow curled himself at the base of the coffin and remained still, as if he understood that the man who had given him everything was resting there forever. No one expected what would happen next. When the mourners left and the cemetery grew quiet, Shadow stayed. He lay across the fresh mound of earth, head resting on his paws, eyes open to the fading light. Hours turned into days, and despite neighbors trying to take him home, offering food and shelter, Shadow always found his way back to the grave. At first, people thought it was grief, a temporary refusal to let go. But as weeks stretched into months, it became clear that Shadow had made a choice. The cemetery became his home. Rain or snow, heat or bitter cold, he remained by Michael's side, as though still guarding him even in death. This loyalty astounded the town. Visitors brought blankets during winter, bowls of water during summer, and food to sustain him. Some tried to adopt him, but Shadow resisted, returning each time to the same patch of ground above the man who had saved him years before. It was as if he believed his purpose had not ended with Michael's passing, that as long as he stayed, a part of their bond remained alive. Newspapers eventually caught wind of the story, and soon people from outside town came to see the dog who slept by his owner's grave. He became a symbol of devotion, drawing attention not for tricks or heroics, but for an unwavering love that defied explanation. Still, despite the attention, Shadow never sought the company of crowds. His focus remained fixed, his vigil unbroken. As seasons passed, his fur grayed, his steps slowed, but his spirit did not waver. Each sunrise found him in the same spot, and each night he curled close against the cold earth. For 10 years, Shadow kept his watch. Through storms, through holidays, through the constant march of time, he remained. Children grew into adults visiting the cemetery, telling their own children about the faithful dog. Michael's grave became more than a resting place. It became a monument to loyalty, not just of man but of a dog whose love transcended death. And so the story spread, whispered in quiet awe, written into local history, and carried far beyond the town. People who had never met Michael or Shadow felt moved, reminded of the deep connections possible between humans and animals. It was a love story in the truest sense, and though it carried sorrow, it also carried inspiration. Because in that dog's devotion, people saw something pure, something unshakable, something that reminded them of what loyalty should mean. The years that followed Shadow's choice to remain by Michael Turner's grave reshaped not just his life, but the life of the entire town. It was as if the cemetery, once a place that people visited with quiet steps and hushed voices, had gained a guardian. Children who once feared walking past the rows of stones at night now whispered stories of the loyal dog who kept watch under the stars. Teenagers, passing by on their way to football practice or part-time jobs, would slow their pace and glance at him, feeling an odd kind of comfort in his presence. And the older generation, who had known Michael personally, would stop and sit on benches nearby, watching Shadow with eyes heavy with both sorrow and admiration. Somehow, the dog's silent vigil turned a place of endings into a place of living testimony. At first, townspeople had worried. They wondered if Shadow would survive the brutal winters, when snow piled high and wind cut through even the thickest coats. They tried everything to persuade him to leave. A local family even brought him into their home one Christmas, showering him with food and warmth. But in the morning, before dawn, they found their door scratched and paw prints leading back toward the cemetery. He had returned to the grave, frost forming around his muzzle as if even the cold could not dissuade him. Another time, a farmer who admired Shadow's strength attempted to keep him on his land, building a sturdy kennel and feeding him well. Yet within 2 days, Shadow escaped, climbing fences and braving traffic until he once again found his way to Michael's resting place. Each attempt only proved what everyone already knew: Shadow's place was not with the living, but with the memory of the man who had once saved him. This steadfast devotion drew visitors from beyond the borders of the town. Word spread slowly at first, through local papers, then through traveling journalists who came to witness the strange, moving sight. Articles called him the Graveyard Sentinel, or the dog who wouldn't leave. Photographers snapped pictures of him curled against the stone marker, his fur wet from rain or glowing golden in the morning light. People wrote letters, sending donations to help feed him, though no one ever truly owned him. He belonged only to Michael, and everyone knew it. For those who came from far away, it was humbling. They expected a spectacle, but what they found was silence, just a dog, growing older, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. And somehow, that quiet loyalty spoke louder than anything else. Children grew up hearing the tale from their parents. They would come to the cemetery with picnic baskets in summer, leaving bits of food by Shadow's side. Some drew pictures of him in school, presenting them proudly to teachers who told them this was not just a story about a dog, but a lesson about love and faithfulness. Weddings were photographed near Michael's grave, the bride and groom often kneeling to stroke Shadow's fur as if asking for a blessing from the loyal guardian. In a way, he became more than Michael's dog. He became the town's symbol of devotion, a reminder of what it meant to stand by someone, no matter the cost. As time passed, however, the years began to show. His once strong frame grew leaner, his pace slower. His fur, once a deep sheen, took on the silvering of age. Still, he did not falter. Neighbors made small shelters nearby, wooden boxes lined with blankets to shield him from storms, but Shadow always lay close to the grave itself, choosing the hard ground over comfort. It was not cruelty, but clarity. He had chosen his place, and no human convenience could replace the warmth he still felt near the man he loved. To anyone watching, it was as though he believed Michael would return if he just waited long enough. That hope became his purpose. One summer evening, when the air buzzed with cicadas and the sun stretched long shadows across the grass, a boy named Adam Jenkins sat near Shadow with a notebook. Adam had grown up hearing about the dog since he was a toddler, and now, as a teenager dreaming of becoming a writer, he wanted to capture the story in his own words. He wrote about Michael, about the first day Shadow arrived at the carpenter's porch, about the funeral, and the years that followed. He stayed there for hours, pen scratching across paper, while Shadow rested nearby, lifting his head occasionally as if approving of the boy's work. Those pages would later become Adam's first published essay in a national magazine, sparking even more attention for Shadow's remarkable vigil. The essay described him not just as a dog, but as a soul who had chosen to turn grief into a lifelong mission. By the 9th year of his vigil, Shadow had become a legend. People came from across the country to visit the town, walking quietly through the cemetery until they found him. Some prayed beside him. Some cried. Many left flowers, not just for Michael, but for the dog himself. Local hotels and diners noticed the influx of visitors, but unlike other tourist attractions, this one demanded respect. There were no souvenirs, no gimmicks, just the profound silence of watching devotion made flesh and fur and bone. The townspeople protected him fiercely, making sure no one disturbed his routine or treated him as an exhibit. He was not there for them, after all. He was there for Michael. In his 10th year, the signs of age could no longer be ignored. His steps grew unsteady, his eyes clouded, but his determination did not waver. That winter was particularly harsh. Snowstorms buried the cemetery under thick white blankets, and the townspeople worried that Shadow would not survive. They came in shifts, checking on him, leaving food close enough for him to reach without moving far. Sometimes they sat with him through the night, wrapping themselves in coats, unwilling to let him endure the cold alone. They were no longer just onlookers. They had become his companions in devotion. It was early spring when Shadow finally lay down one evening, curling close to the gravestone where he had spent nearly a decade of his life. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. When morning came, he did not rise. A groundskeeper found him still, his head resting gently on his paws, as though he had simply fallen asleep. The news spread through town with the weight of a bell tolling. People wept openly, children left drawings at the grave, and the pastor declared during Sunday's service that Shadow had taught us more about loyalty than any sermon could. The cemetery held a second gathering that week, not for a man this time, but for a dog. People came with flowers, with stories, with tears. They buried him beside Michael, placing a small stone marker inscribed simply with the words, "Shadow, faithful friend." For many, it felt like the closing of a chapter, but for others, it was the continuation of one. Because Shadow's vigil had changed them. It had shown them what devotion looked like without condition, what love meant when it did not fade with time, and what it meant to be faithful to the very end. In the years that followed, the story of Shadow and Michael became part of the town's identity. Schoolteachers retold it to new generations of children, reminding them that loyalty was not just an idea, but something lived. Travelers continued to visit, leaving flowers at the twin graves, often whispering prayers of gratitude. And Adam Jenkins, the boy who once wrote about Shadow in his notebook, went on to publish a book about the story, ensuring it reached far beyond the town. In interviews, he would often say, "Shadow wasn't just Michael's dog. He was our teacher. He showed us how to love with no end." The legend of Shadow became immortal not because of grand gestures, but because of the simple truth he embodied, that love, once given, never truly dies. People who had lost loved ones came to the cemetery to sit near his grave, drawing comfort from the thought that devotion endures. Couples on the brink of giving up on each other found hope in his memory. Children who feared loss found reassurance that bonds continue beyond what the eye can see. Shadow's story transcended species, time, and even death. And so, when the sun sets over the cemetery and the air grows still, locals say you can still feel a presence there, an invisible watchfulness, a silent promise kept. Shadow may have closed his eyes, but his legacy remains open, alive in every heart that hears his story. For in the end, he did not just guard Michael's grave. He guarded the very idea of loyalty itself. And as we reflect on this extraordinary journey, let it remind us all of the power of devotion, of love that expects nothing in return, and of the simple, profound truth that sometimes, the purest bonds are the ones we least expect. Shadow may have been a dog, but in his loyalty, he revealed something deeply human, something eternal. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor the loyalty in your own life. Cherish the bonds you have, never take love for granted, and remember Shadow's example. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told and shared, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can experience the power of loyalty and love that truly never ends.